MSNBC, Ali Velshi has been surprising me as of recent. He actually is now calling out Joe Biden's a lack of, lack of push towards Benjamin Netanyahu. He's calling these things out on MSNBC. And this is after he just called out AIPAC and listed a bunch of names that AIPAC is giving money to. I think we need to get into this clip here. Shout out to Case Study QB for this, discussing how dependent Israel is on America and asking why President Biden isn't using his leverage on Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's dive in.
For the first time in 100 generations, we, the Jewish people, can defend ourselves.
That was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in 2015, making a joint address to Congress urging against a nuclear deal with Iran. He raised the specter of genocide in his remarks, but said defiantly that Israel could defend itself. However, that was not entirely true then, and it's not entirely true today. Israel has never defended itself by itself. Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid since its creation.
I don't know what is happening to MSNBC. What's that, Ashura? Ashura said Ali is next to leave. Ali, listen, hun. Ali pushing buttons, isn't he, Ashura? First, he was calling out AIPAC and all the politicians that are getting money from them. And now Ali is calling out Joe Biden. So, yeah, he has a point here about all the money that the U.S. government has been giving Israel over the years.
According to congressional data, it has received more than $200 billion in economic assistance and billions more in missile defense funding. That assistance includes some of the weapons that Israel is using in its war with Hamas, a war that has now claimed more than 31,000 lives and counting, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. At the start of this conflict, President Joe Biden was quick to offer his unwavering support of Israel's right to defend itself, but he's begun criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu over attacks on civilians and a blockade of aid that could force as many as 1.1 million people, half the population of Gaza, to the brink of starvation. President Biden keeps calling for Israel to show restraint, but could he go farther? He has leverage in this situation. The supply of U.S. weapons paid for by American citizens that Israel is using in this war. So why won't the president use that particular leverage?
Pause for a second. Notice he is now mentioning that basically the U.S. government could put a stop to this by simply refusing to send weapons to Israel and fund Israel. So he's letting everyone who's watching, everyone who's watching this segment, he's letting them know that the United States can put a stop to this immediately. Ali, we're going to send you a wish and a prayer because I don't know how much longer they're going to keep you on MSNBC.
Joining me now is Michelle Goldberg, opinion columnist for the New York Times. Michelle, thank you for being with us. It's an interesting few weeks we've been watching where President Biden announced airdrops of aid, announced a sea bridge that Anthony Blinken says will be in effect in about 2 weeks. As if we're dealing with a country with whom we don't enjoy great influence. He would really like Netanyahu to allow the aid into Gaza, and yet he can't get him to do it.
Well, look, I think that, Netanyahu has always shown, he expects enormous amounts of deference from American leaders and shows Democratic presidents, kind of complete contempt and defiance. And we've seen this over and over again. And I think he depends on domestic politics constraining American presidents, or at least Democratic American presidents, because obviously Israel has very strong supporters among large parts of the American Jewish community, among evangelical Christians. It's made it in the past, kind of politically poisonous to go against Israel. But that hasn't always been the case. I think a example that people bring up all the time is Ronald Reagan basically demanding that Begin stop, I think, what he called a Holocaust in Lebanon in the 80s. And there's other.
And pause. Not really since then, though. Ronald Reagan did do that. And by the way, when Ronald Reagan did that, it was not a popular decision. People were not happy with that decision that Ronald Reagan made at that point in time, but he did it anyway. But Joe Biden also has received the most money from the Israeli lobby.
There are times in which American presidents have exercised real leverage over Israel. It just falls to Biden to actually do it.
But what you just commented on, what Netanyahu knows is that there are domestic political considerations about that in America. So where Biden is facing pressure from some progressives and some people within the Democratic Party for not exercising that leverage that he's got, if he were to, what happens then?
Well, I think that, look, there's blowback either way. And so at a certain point, you say, you have to kind of make a decision based on morality and leadership, not just domestic political calculations. Not that domestic political calculations are unimportant, especially given the existential threat that's at stake in the November election. But I think that, look, I mean, you have Chuck Schumer basically talking about Netanyahu as an obstacle to peace. You have a huge amount of opposition to this Israeli government among Jews, the vast majority of whom are Democrats. And so either way, because this is an issue that divides the Democratic Party, either way, there's going to be some fallout. But I think the fallout, the fallout from not acting is humanitarian catastrophe. I mean, the only thing that I would disagree with you, Ali, is when you said, I think that over 1 million people might be on the brink of starvation. They're on the brink of starvation now. By the time they actually, I'm sure it's by the time they actually declare a famine,
right,
it is going to be too late to save so many of these people. And so, and then I also think just in terms of kind of our national security, the idea of kind of showing strength can sometimes be overrated in American politics, but there's something kind of pathetic about having Israel that is so dependent, or at least so willing, such a massive recipient of American aid, being so defiant of the wishes and the demands of the American government.
Let me pause there for a second. And she works at the New York Times. I wonder how long she's going to keep that gig. But the point that she made there was really interesting about the fact that Israel is receiving money from the United States. It's not the other way around. So why are we continuing to give Israel money and they're not even listening to, what the demands of the U.S. government, which is to make sure the humanitarian aid comes in, which these demands are weak demands. OK, because my demands would be to end the occupation. Permanent ceasefire in the occupation. Those would be my demands. And we're still giving the money. That's like giving your kid, allowance and they're not doing their chores. If you told them you get allowance if you do your chores and like a whole month has gone by and they haven't done any chores, why would you still give them allowance? So Israel in this sense is behaving like a spoiled, bratty child because they can. And the reason why they can is because the U.S. government continues to fund them. The moment the U.S. government cut off that funding, the child is no longer spoiled and bratty. But if you continue to give them money, they're not going to change their behavior. And the U.S. government continues to give them the money because the Israeli lobby owns the U.S. government. That's just the reality of the situation.
You make an interesting point. The Chuck Schumer stuff, the speech he made last week, may have been lost on some people. It's remarkable. Chuck Schumer going out on that much of a limb to criticize Benjamin Netanyahu. And look, he's America's highest ranking elected Jewish person. He was not critical of Israel, the country. He was simply critical of Netanyahu and stopped just a little short of asking him to resign. But he did think Israel should elect a new leader.
Right. And my guess is that Chuck Schumer does not go out and give a speech like that without giving a heads up to the White House. I think that at this point, Netanyahu he's obviously an obstacle, or his government is an obstacle to getting humanitarian aid into Gaza. And also he's an obstacle to any sort of plan for the day after, which is one reason why they are, there's a lot of reasons why they are quickly losing support in the United States and around the world. But one is because there's no end to this on the horizon. There's no day after.
Okay. So it's really interesting. People are coming forward more so now. We got to give the shout out here to Code Pink because I want to show you just how the politicians actually feel about this issue. Because Code Pink actually confronted Speaker Mike Johnson, because I don't know if people know this, but he is actually inviting Benjamin Netanyahu to come speak to Congress because Bibi wants money. Just like Zelensky came to Congress and he asked for money, now he's inviting Bibi to Congress to ask for money. So Code Pink actually confronted him. They've confronted others. It says yesterday, Speaker Johnson announced that he'd be inviting Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to DC to address a joint session of Congress. So listen to this piece here.
No more money to Israel. No more money to Israel. No more money for genocide. Stop supporting genocide. Do not invite criminals. No more criminals in DC. No more criminals in DC. No more criminals.
Yeah. So Speaker Mike Johnson there all of a sudden just happens to be on his phone, of course, to avoid the protesters. BB actually, again, of course, is being very defiant. As you'll see here, he doesn't care what Joe Biden has to say. He still is planning to go into Rafah. This is very dangerous. I can't even just believe the cowardice that some of these other, not just the United States, but the Western countries have against the state of Israel, because they sat up there and they took that money and they took money from these lobby groups. And so now they're in bed with these people. This is just the cowardice that is on display. It is absolutely disgusting.
נפגשתי היום עם מזכיר המדינה בלינקן. אמרתי לו שאני מאוד מעריך את העובדה שיותר מ5 חודשים אנחנו עומדים יחד במלחמה נגד החמאס. אמרתי לו גם שאנחנו מכירים בצורך לפנות את האוכלוסייה האזרחית מאזורי המלחמה, וכמובן לדאוג גם לצרכים ההומניטריים, אנחנו פועלים לשם כך. אבל גם אמרתי שאין לנו דרך לנצח את החמאס בלי להיכנס לרפיח ולחסל את שארית הגדודים שם. ואמרתי לו שאני מקווה שנעשה את זה בתמיכה של ארצות הברית, אבל אם נצטרך, נעשה זאת לבד.
So let me tell you
נפגשתי
what
היום עם מזכיר המדינה בלינקן.
BB, after meeting with Blinken today, we will go to Rafah and finish Hamas. This is after meeting with Antony Blinken. We will go to Rafah and finish Hamas. We'd rather have the U.S. stand with us, but if they don't, we will do it anyway. So this just goes to show you how defiant they are being. And our government is still giving the money. Terrible, terrible.